Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. A southern Alberta teenager has died suddenly from what her father believes to be a variant of COVID-19. Legislative reporter Tyler Dawson has a fundraising update from Alberta's provincial parties, and there's a surprise of who was on top. And the federal Tories blasted Prime Minister Justin Trudeau for saying he did not know about the extent of misconduct allegations involving Canada's former top soldier.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney announced that beginning Friday, the province will be implementing new targeted COVID-19 measures in hotspots with more than 350 active cases to bring the case counts under control. This includes Calgary, Edmonton, Red Deer, Grand Prairie, Fort McMurray, and here in Lethbridge. All junior and senior high schools will go back to at-home learning beginning on Monday. Indoor fitness and indoor sports will be closed effective Friday for the next 2 weeks.
Once they come into place, these mandatory restrictions will remain in effect for a minimum of 2 weeks, even if the municipality drops below the threshold at any point. After 2 weeks, communities will go back to the provincial measures, currently step 1, as soon as they dip below the 350 case rate per 100,000. Health officials will continue closely to monitor the spread of COVID-19 to assess how all of this is working. We'll also work with restaurants to increase stringency of verification that members of parties for patio service are from the same household or are the two identified close contacts of individuals who live alone.
Kenney says the steps were necessary as hospitalizations continue to rise. He says variants represent 63% of active cases. There are currently 632 in hospital with COVID-19 in Alberta, which is a record. A Southern Alberta high school student has died from what her father believes is a variant of COVID-19. McGrath High School teacher Ron Stratty says his 17-year-old daughter Sarah's health deteriorated quickly on Monday and that she died shortly after arriving in hospital. Stratty says Alberta Health is investigating whether she did in fact die from the virus. He says Sarah was an active and vibrant teenager who was a drummer, a pianist, and was also enrolled to take massage therapy at Lethbridge College this fall. Ron Stratty, who's received more than 1,000 messages of condolence, says students will be wearing onesies at Sarah's high school next Monday to honor her since she enjoyed wearing them so much. He says they will miss her, but in their faith, they believe they will see her again and cannot wait. The Alberta government is expanding its age eligibility for vaccines as it deals with a couple of COVID-19 hotspots. Premier Jason Kenney says the measures will help address concerns in Banff and Lake Louise, along with the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo. Kenney says shipments of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine will be sent to the hotspots, and the age eligibility for the AstraZeneca vaccine will drop from 40 to 30 in the troubled areas. The province reported close to 21,000 active cases on Wednesday, the second highest total since the pandemic began. Now, the mayor of one of those hotspots called a local state of emergency earlier this week because of the soaring numbers of COVID-19 cases. But Wood Buffalo Mayor Don Scott says he's grateful for the concession the province is making in allowing younger people to be vaccinated.
We have a very young population, so a lot of people did not qualify for the vaccines as they might have in other regions or other communities. So our average age in this community is 32.7, and when you have a vaccine eligibility of age 40 or higher, then obviously you're going to have an issue with people qualifying. We have the worst numbers per capita in Alberta, and many have said it's the worst per capita in Canada. So we have just over 1,200 cases at this point, and it's a very bad situation. The number that's been passed down to us, and we never get the best information as a municipality. The province and the federal government obviously has way better information than we ever do, but we're hearing about 1 in 100 people have the infection. So the variants are taking a toll on this community.
Mayor Scott says the extended hours of vaccine accessibility will hopefully allow for many of their shift workers to be inoculated. Now, that same Northern Alberta community is commemorating a somber anniversary this weekend. On May 1st, the city of Fort McMurray will observe 5 years since a devastating wildfire swept through the community, forcing the largest wildfire evacuation in Alberta's history. Around 88,000 people were forced to flee from their homes. Now, 5 years later, the majority of the community has been rebuilt. Mayor Don Scott says it's not quite the same, however, particularly since the region was also flooded last summer.
We have made significant progress, but I don't want to pretend for a moment that everybody has made it through this experience of the wildfire and the flood, obviously more recently. They have lasting impacts. Not everyone has rebuilt, not everyone has fully recovered, and there's lingering mental health effects that I've certainly heard about and seen, and I've encouraged people to seek out others and seek help when they need it. So there's still work to be done, but there's been significant progress too. It's hard to put a number to it because some people are still obviously going through insurance claims, and that takes a considerable period to resolve. And others are, seeking help. And when anniversaries like this come up, I think it revives some of the feelings that that people had several years back when they experienced these things firsthand.
COVID-19 vaccination clinics began today at two of Canada's largest beef packing plants in southern Alberta. Both the Cargill plant near High River and the JBS Canada facility in Brooks were hit hard by outbreaks last year. The two plants together normally process around 70% of Canada's beef. The president of the union representing workers at the plants says they're relieved the immunizations are taking place. When it comes to fundraising, many times conservative parties here in Alberta usually outdo their competition, but not lately. According to legislative reporter Tyler Dawson, the NDP out-fundraised the UCP by a 2-to-1 margin. The NDP raised $1.2 million, while the UCP apparently brought in only around $600,000. Dawson says the former leader of the Wild Rose Party, Brian Jean, says a big reason is that the NDP is now receiving donations from many grassroots Albertans.
A lot of the fundraising that happens in Alberta politics is individual donations of up to, I think it's $250. So a lot of the money that parties rely on for their advertising, their campaigning or whatever, isn't necessarily from, big corporate donors like it is in the US. It's from regular folks cutting them a check. And so when you look at 600,000 versus 1.2 million, I mean, that is a big difference. And as you say, Brian Jean's saying, look, I mean, if these are all small donations, a lot of these are small donations, and you're being out fundraised this badly, there's a problem afoot for the UCP.
Mr. Dawson will also talk about a recent court ruling supporting Alberta's right to turn off the oil taps to British Columbia. That is coming up right after business news. The Alberta RCMP is asking drivers to use extra caution when driving on provincial highways this weekend. Thousands of volunteers are participating in Alberta Transportation's 45th annual highway cleanup from 7 a.m. till 5 p.m. on Saturday. Each year, volunteers from various youth groups and clubs spend the day cleaning up trash along the roadways as a means of raising funds for their charities. The RCMP say cleanup areas will be clearly marked and to be sure to watch out for added foot traffic. Police in Calgary seized nearly $1 million worth of drugs and 6 firearms after 2 homes were raided on February 16th. Alert Calgary says the drug bust took around 20,000 doses of fentanyl off the street. Alert worked in tandem with the Calgary Police Service and the RCMP to target street-level opioid and meth sales. 6 people face various drug-related offenses.
With this disruption, we got significant charges as well as seizing this amount of drugs to make the community safer. This investigation is one of many different disruption targeted arrests. This is a fairly significant seizure of fentanyl. Small ones, large ones, all make an impact onto the availability of drugs. The opioid crisis is certainly significant for Alert, and working with all of our partners, whether it's the Calgary Police Service, RCMP, Sutina, we're looking at our ability to investigate and make sure that the Calgary and area community is safer.
Police say since 2018, alert teams from across the province have seized 18 kilograms of fentanyl powder and over 250,000 fentanyl pills. Officials say over 100 investigations have been conducted involving opioids. A Lethbridge woman has been charged with stealing more than $500,000 from the University of Lethbridge. Lethbridge police say 57-year-old Donna Court faces charges of fraud over $5,000, theft over $5,000, and possession of stolen property. Police say the U of L contacted them in 2018 to investigate Court, who allegedly used her position at the university to falsify records and to conceal the theft over the course of a year. Court has been released from custody and will appear in court to answer to the charges on June the 29th. Raising awareness and funds for kidney disease and organ donation is a top priority for organizers of this year's Kidney March. As Micah Quinn explains now, a marcher who donated one of her own kidneys will be participating in the event for the 12th year in a row.
This is the second year that the Kidney March will pivot to a virtual event due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
We're going to actually start marching on August the 1st. And so between then and the beginning of September, people will march 70 kilometers wherever they are, whenever they are over that time period to get those kilometers notched up. And then the last 3 days of Kidney March, September 10th to the 12th, we've asked people to walk 10 kilometers on each of those days. So the grand total will be 100 kilometers over that period of time.
Organ donation plays a huge role in helping out members of the community. Carol Stoker donated one of her kidneys to her sister-in-law Yvonne after her husband wasn't able to donate his kidney after testing showed that he was a non-viable donor.
One day I just said to him, "How would you feel if I donated my kidney?" And we just kind of both stopped and took a big breath and went, "Whoa, did I just say that?" Scary process. You worry about yourself, your family worries about you. But I wouldn't change it for the world. The whole experience, I was scared up until the moment of. And you don't really know that it's actually going to go through until you wake up after your anesthetic and say, "Yep, your kidney's gone." A great feeling, something that you can do for somebody else.
The goal for this year's Kidney March is to raise $1 million, with all the money going towards kidney research and patient programs.
That's going to change the future, change the lives of people with kidney disease. So very critical. All of the patient services that we offer are free of charge. So funding is important to fund all of those services. All of our organ donation initiatives are impacted by the funds raised through Kidney March. So this money is very, very important because it's important in funding all of the work that we do.
For more information on the Kidney March, you can visit kidneymarch.ca. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
COVID-19 won't stop Habitat for Humanity Lethbridge from safely building a new home in 2021. The nonprofit has secured a location for this year's build and shared common misconceptions about their work. BCN's Ainsley O'Reilly spoke with a volunteer who's been with the organization for 25 years.
Daniel Shapiro has been with Habitat for Humanity since 1997. He says their biggest barrier is land acquisition. They've built 5 homes on Temple Boulevard, 5 in the Highlands District, and 3 on Pacific Landing West, all for local families in need.
One is for a single mom with 3 kids. Another is for a mom and dad with 3 kids. And last year's build, a mom and dad with 6 kids.
The families are required to put in 500 hours of sweat equity. You name it, they're involved in the building process. After the home is appraised, many people aren't aware that the family is in charge of mortgage payments.
And it'll take them 25 years to pay off their mortgage like anybody else.
Habitat for Humanity Lethbridge does 1 build a year, and they say that COVID-19 won't deter them from this year's build, which is currently a pile of dirt on Kensington Road West.
All systems go. We've dug the hole. We have our plans, our building permit, of course. And COVID is not going to slow us down.
No official date has been set on the 2021 home at 39 Kensington, but Shapiro hopes the family will move in by the end of August.
It's a dream come true for them that they never envisioned, quite likely in their life, that they would have home ownership.
For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
Mouths will be watering for this year's Southern Alberta table events. The Lethbridge and District Exhibition is partnering with the Lethbridge Lodging Association to bring forth events featuring barbecue competitions, a celebrity chef harvest dinner, and an Amazing Race-esque food event. Mike Workington, the Chief Operating Officer for the exhibition, says there's been a high demand for events featuring agriculture and tourism here in our city.
Everyone I know has a smoker now in their backyard. Everyone I know is smoking meat, baking, doing things. And so they're not only just doing these things with traditional means, they're actually wanting to know where their flour is coming from, where their sugar's coming from, where the steak on their plate is coming from. And we have such an abundance of this in Southern Alberta. And Southern Alberta is so rich in natural agriculture resources, in sunlight hours, in the irrigation districts that are here, in the rich soil that exists here in Southern Alberta. It's so prime to be such a major production and processing region.
The events will run from June through the end of August. They have quickly gained popularity in recent years, ride-sharing and food delivery services. A new company in Medicine Hat is looking to take on some big players like Uber, Uber Eats, and Skip the Dishes. BCN's Naveen Day has the story.
A new rideshare and food delivery service is becoming a growing trend in Medicine Hat, and that's because the dollars are staying in the hands of the city's residents. Trevor Penner, who started 24/7 rideshare services, explains why he started the company.
Being a former cab driver, I thought, why not take advantage of the opportunity Medicine Hat is giving for offering a rideshare company to come in. And so we've got a really good platform to work with. It's somewhat like a Uber Eats. And now we can evolve our restaurants, which I thought is a perfect time for the pandemic. We can have our delivery service coordinated with our passengers, and we can make everyone have a discount.
Much like other ride-hailing and food delivery services, the customer needs to download an app to create an account to start using the platform. Both Penner and driver Dan Howard say they are able to operate with more efficiency than larger companies in their industry, which allows them to pass savings onto their customers.
It's about a 20% discount from the regular cab fare that you would get with most companies. We're able to do that because we've able to lower our overhead, so we can still do okay with that. But the big thing is the savings go on to the customers that use us regularly. We have one fellow that's already told us that he's saving over $200 a month in his transportation to work and back just by using our service. And that is very substantial for people.
For Bridge City News, I'm Naveen Day.
Police in Saskatoon issued around a dozen tickets in connection with an anti-COVID-19 health measures rally held in the city last weekend. The tickets to people who attended the Children's Freedom Rally were handed out for violating public health orders. The rally held near the Vimy Memorial featured a magician, hula hoops, and jump roping. Most of the people who attended apparently did not wear masks. Health officials in Manitoba say they're seeing a lot of people in rural areas south of Winnipeg who are not wanting the COVID-19 vaccines. They say they're planning to reach out to the community and religious leaders in an attempt to get more people vaccinated.
It's not that we have any clear scientific data to say that it's religion specifically leading to any sort of hesitancy. Rather, it's more who are the community leaders and how is the community organized and how do they connect with each other. And looking at the individual communities, it's key for us to identify those community leaders, which are often religious leaders, so that we can help build confidence in the vaccine. Through a trusted voice, through somebody that if we can connect with and help identify any barriers or concerns they may have, that they could serve as a bit of a champion for the vaccine.
Our poll question this week is, do you think the Trudeau Liberals have done a good job during the COVID-19 pandemic? Make sure you log on to bridgecitynews.ca and vote. We'll tabulate the results and have them for you on Friday's newscast. Opposition MPs are not buying Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's claim that he didn't know the exact nature of the misconduct allegations against former top military commander Jonathan Vance. They're accusing him of covering up to protect the Old Boys Club.
I believe strongly that those of us in positions of authority have a duty to act upon allegations of this nature. He said that before firing 2 of his MPs for sexual misconduct allegations, Mr. Speaker. He acted then, but hasn't acted for 3 years after direct allegations were brought forward by a woman serving her country in uniform. Why did the Prime Minister fail in his duty to her?
Every step of the way, this government has always taken seriously the responsibility to support and provide resources and follow up with anyone who comes forward with allegations of sexual misconduct or assault in the armed forces or otherwise.
The fact is the Prime Minister and his government covered up serious allegations of sexual misconduct against the Chief of the Defence Staff, and now he's covering up his cover-up by saying he didn't know. It's just not believable. What's believable is this. The Prime Minister only pretends to be a feminist, when in fact he's at the top of the Old Boys Club. Just a wink and a nudge. Don't worry, boys, your secret is safe with him.
Now that spring has arrived, this is the time of year when many of us think about cleaning up our yards. We asked Karen Barbie, co-owner of Green Haven Garden Centre here in Lethbridge, when is a good time to pull out the rake and start raking up some of the dead grass and leaves?
Grass is greening up quite well here. That raking and cleaning up actually needed to happen in April this year because we were very dry this winter. There was a lot of leaf cleanup and everything. That needs to get done right away. So it's basically for us too late for power raking, but you can do a hand raking, and then fertilizer should start now, and you can do it every couple of months. There's some good spring, summer fertilizers that will help keep that lawn nice and green.
With more on lawn maintenance, be sure to catch the full interview with Karen Barbie from Greenhaven Garden Centre and BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up in the second half of our program. Well, it was another beautiful spring-like day here in the Windy City, a good time to do some of that raking, and that mercury will be climbing even further. A complete look at the weather picture is coming up. We had some clouds mixed with sunshine today and fairly mild. Jeanette Rocher is back with a complete look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, we may have had a warm day here in Lethbridge, but those winds, such strong winds, it was actually a good day to maybe take down those patio umbrellas.
Yes, winds were gusting up to 70 kilometers per hour earlier today, and it should keep up for tomorrow as well, but sunny with a high of 23 degrees. Saturday, 60% chance of showers, 14 degrees the high. That rain should actually continue throughout Saturday evening. Sunday, it should clear up a little bit, 13 degrees the high, 12 degrees for Monday with a mix of sun and cloud. Then into Tuesday, we're looking at a 40% chance of showers with a high of 13 degrees and a high of 15 next Wednesday with a mix of sun and cloud. Now, according to the almanac, the average high for this time of year, 16 degrees, average low, 2 degrees. Our high temperature on this day was 29 degrees back in 1939. In 2005, we had our lowest day on record, which was minus 12. Sun rose this morning at 6:12 a.m., sunset at 8:46 this evening. Looking at the national forecast for tomorrow over on the West Coast, chance of showers in both Vancouver and Victoria with the highs of 17 in both of those cities, 20 degrees the high in Edmonton, and 21 in Calgary with lots of sunshine. Over in Saskatoon, a high of 23 degrees is expected, a high of 24 tomorrow in Regina, and 14 degrees is the expected high in Winnipeg. In Toronto, a mix of showers or flurries, high of only 7 degrees. 10 degrees is the high in Ottawa. Same thing for Montreal. Both of those cities seeing showers tomorrow. And on the Atlantic coast, showers expected in Fredericton with a high of 8, high of 11 in Halifax with rain. Periods of rain also expected in Charlottetown with a high of 12, and sunshine in St. John's, Newfoundland with a high of 9 degrees. That is your forecast.
The federal government has reached a deal to provide Air Transat with an additional $700 million in financing. The tour company will be allowed to borrow the money through the same program that was used to help Air Canada. Transat says $310 million will be used to provide reimbursements to travelers, while the rest will be used to support its business. The tour company suspended all flights following Ottawa's request in January to stop travel to Mexico and the Caribbean due to the COVID-19 pandemic. With lumber prices hitting record highs, Canfor says it recorded a first quarter profit of $427.8 million. The Vancouver-based company says that compares to a loss of $70 million in the same quarter last year. Canfor says higher pricing outweighed higher market-related log costs for Western Canada. There was also much lower shipment volumes across North America. Sales total $1.94 billion. That is up from $1.17 billion in the first 3 months of last year. Calgary-based Vermilion Energy says its net income jumped $500 million in its first quarter. That is up from a net loss of $1.3 billion in the same period last year. The producer of oil and gas says its financial results were supported by higher oil prices and strong natural gas prices in Europe. Vermilion says it had production of 86,300 barrels of oil equivalent per day in the first 3 months of this year, ahead of its annual guidance range of between 83 and 85,000. It is still well short, however, of its first quarter output in 2020 of 97,200 barrels. Demand for the iPhone and other Apple products drove profits to more than double in the January to March period. The American-based tech giant continued to capitalize on the smartphone addiction. Profits came to $23.6 billion US, or $1.40 per share, while revenue climbed 54% to $89.6 billion in the fiscal second quarter. The release of the 4 iPhone 12 models last fall has unleashed purchases, with iPhone sales rising 66% to $48 billion. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 101 points on the day to finish at 19,256. The Dow was up 239 points to 34,060. The S&P 500 was up 28 points to 4211, and the Nasdaq was up 31 points on the day to 14,083. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 96 cents to 64.82 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 6 cents to 2.90 US. Gold was up 10 cents to 1772.28 US an ounce, and silver was even on the day at 26.09 US an ounce. Wheat is at $335 per metric ton, barley's at $349, canola's at $870, and corn is at $398 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 53 cents to $119.48, feeder cattle were up 60 cents to $134.48, and lean hogs were down $2.55 to $108.73. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the last 24 hours to 81.41 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, a Southern Alberta high school student has died from what her father believes is a variant of COVID-19. McGrath High School teacher Ron Stratty says his 17-year-old daughter Sarah's health deteriorated quickly on Monday and that she died shortly after arriving in hospital. Stratty says Alberta Health is investigating whether she did in fact die from the virus. The numbers are in from a recent fundraising campaign involving Alberta's provincial parties, and those numbers may surprise you a little. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson will have details for us coming up shortly. A story we've been covering on Bridge City News is how the Federal Court of Appeal ruled that Alberta does have the right to turn off the oil taps to other provinces. Now, to discuss this in more detail is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson. Tyler, this all stems from the feud between Alberta and BC over the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion?
Doesn't that feel like so long ago? I was reading the decision, and this actually goes all the way back to when Rachel Notley was premier. It was her government that put in Bill 12, that was basically the turn off the taps legislation. Now, when the Kenney government took over in the spring of 2019, they went ahead and proclaimed Bill 12 into law. The NDP said basically they were saving it for when they were going to need it. So the UCP goes, puts this into law. Immediately, BC responds with a court challenge. And this is when, in about September 2019, they're granted an injunction, which means that it can't be used until the constitutionality of the law is settled. Fast forward, well, maybe not fast forward because it's almost 2 years later, the Federal Court of Appeal has struck down that injunction. So a decision hasn't been made on whether or not turn off the taps is constitutional per se. However, it does at the moment give the Alberta government the opportunity to use it should they need to. The argument against the injunction being basically that the law was never used, so how can you challenge whether or not it can be used? So that's, the Sonia Savage, the energy minister, saying we're going to continue fighting for Alberta's energy. This is, a positive sign and all that. But it's just kind of funny to think back to this as feels like it was so long ago, but also kind of a bipartisan policy in some ways that both recent Alberta governments have sort of stood behind.
It does seem like a while ago, you're right. And last time I checked, I think as well that BC's going to have to pay for Alberta's court costs too.
Yes, they were ordered to pay some costs. Yeah, so maybe they can send some crates of wine in lieu of payment or something.
Tyler, 5 First Nations groups have written to the province asking for Indigenous consultation on their coal mining policy. Now, they say they haven't been directly approached. Instead, they've just been asked to participate in the public consultation process.
Yeah, so there seems to be a little bit of movement on this file. A few days ago, the province sort of set out the details of what its consultation on the coal mining is going to be. This, of course, dating back to the 1976 coal policy on the eastern slopes of the Rockies. Much drama over the past few months about that. And First Nations groups said, look, we sort of want, separate consultation to hear our issues. And it seems like there's some movement on that front from Savage's office. They said they're sort of working on something that might run in parallel with the public consultations. But this, of course, is part of a much larger discussion over the future of coal in Alberta. And we talked a couple weeks back about the NDP bill that would, if it becomes law, it sort of put a stop to coal exploration in the Rockies. Now that bill was surprisingly moved ahead from committee to to the legislature. But it seems like it's actually probably not going to end up being debated before the end of the legislative session. So a few moving parts here on this coal policy, and no doubt not finished yet. And it will be interesting, of course, to see what the Indigenous consultation brings up, if it ends up running in concert with the other consultation.
Tyler, you and I, it's safe to say we both agree that we live in a beautiful province. We've got Banff, we've got Waterton, we've got Jasper, the Rockies that we've talked about. Now, the UCP says more money is needed to maintain services in Kananaskis country, so they announced that people now will have to fork out about $90 for an annual pass or a $15 per day fee for visiting K country. Now, the fees, which are also needed for cleaning and supporting infrastructure, will bring in about, $15 million a year? Can families, it's a fee, but can families really afford this right now as we head into camping season?
Well, that's certainly what the New Democrats are saying. They're saying, look, this is a hard time for many Alberta families. Camping is a lower cost holiday for many people, and the UCP is sort of adding insult to injury with these fees. Now, of course, this just comes a couple weeks after they did the similar thing, I should say, for Crown land camping, where you'd need to get an annual pass. There was considerably less money. It's slipping my mind slightly, but I think about $35 or something for a year. So yeah, $90 will get you in for the year. Now, that perhaps doesn't seem like a lot of money put up against a parks pass, however, which is about $140 for a year, gets you access to dozens of national parks around the country. So little bit of controversy happening there. There's also some sort of side controversy on this particular decision happening. There were some 5.3 million visitors to Kananaskis country last year, and so that's sort of the reason why they say that they need trail maintenance and upkeep and garbage cleaning and things like that. But there's also this odd situation where you have a park in that area, the Peter Lougheed Provincial Park, and you have some Crown land sort of adjacent to it, and it's a little bit unclear about who's going to be charged where and whether or not some users, such as off-highway vehicles, might be subject to these $90 fees or not. So a little bit of figuring out, I suppose, for people who are planning to go out this summer to find out whether or not their activities are going to be within the boundary that they're going to need to pay for.
That's funny. I did actually just order my Canada Parks pass again this year, and it was I think it came to $146 all in. So I'm like, well, it's a good thing I'm going to get my money's worth, because I do love going to Waterton, Banff, and then Jasper as well. Now,
and you're so close to Waterton down there.
Oh yeah, Waterton is spectacular. We love it down here. Tyler, the province has announced that they will be easing visitor restrictions on long-term care homes, which will allow up to 4 friends or family to visit residents. Now, this is great news for our seniors who've been stuck in their homes for much of the pandemic.
That's right. So the announcement came a little bit earlier this week. However, it's not going to come into effect until May 10th. Now, the reason for that seems to be just to make sure that everyone sort of had their couple weeks of immunity building to the COVID vaccines. Something like almost all of the people who work in these care homes and who live in them have now had their vaccinations, which is, great news, considering I think about 60% of all hospitalizations during the pandemic were people in care homes. As you say, there will be people, up to 4 people, allowed to visit, which is, of course, great news for everyone who's had only maybe 1 or 2 people who've been able to visit them. Some people haven't had any visitors at certain points. So a wonderful development, I think, objectively for the seniors who will get to see folks. And there's also going to be a little bit of easing of the rules around outdoor gatherings, sort of depending on the facility, whether or not they think it's safe, whether or not they have the space. So it is perhaps possible that there will be some, small outdoor gatherings for some of the people in care homes in the months and weeks to come.
The opposition NDP is calling on the province to add 10 days of sick leave so that people don't need to work while recovering from or isolating from COVID-19. Now, it's been a major political flashpoint in Ontario, and now it's kind of a bone of contention here in our province.
Yeah, it's been a bone of contention everywhere. I was also just reading about British Columbia, where John Horgan's having to think about it too. And yeah, the idea is fairly straightforward, that if you fall ill, if you work for a company that doesn't give you sick leave, you shouldn't have to sort of choose between whether or not you're going to be able to pay the bills or stay home and isolate. So the NDP is bringing that up, hoping to have that happen. I wouldn't say we have a commitment from the United Conservatives on it yet. I mean, if you look to Ontario, Doug Ford's government, held off on this until like Wednesday this week, trying to sort of push back on it a little bit. So very contentious policy, and we'll have to see where that one ends up going.
Tyler, some recent fundraising numbers are out, and surprisingly, the NDP has raised more money lately than the UCP. Jason Kenney's party brought in around $600,000, while Rachel Notley and company pulled in about $1.2 million. And apparently, a former Wild Roser, Brian Jean, says the NDP is gaining ground among grassroots Albertans.
Yeah, so a lot of the fundraising that happens in Alberta politics is individual donations of up to, I think it's $250. So a lot of the money that parties rely on for their advertising, their campaigning or whatever, isn't necessarily from, big corporate donors like it is in the US. It's from regular folks cutting them a check. And so when you look at 600,000 versus 1.2 million, I mean, that is a big difference. And as you say, Brian Jean's saying, look, I mean, if these are all small donations, a lot of these are small donations, and you're being out fundraised this badly, there's a problem afoot for the UCP. So, it's just another one of the issues that the party is facing. Of course, they've had a lot of trouble the last 6 months, in particular, the last year in general. But the fundraising numbers, I don't know if anyone expected those figures. And, just as a quick roundup for the other parties that are out there, the Alberta Party brought in about 48,000, 37,000 for the Wild Rose Independence Party, and coming in towards the bottom of the barrel, the Alberta Liberal Party with 32,000. So, if you add up all the smaller parties, they're still not getting very far. But man, the UCP just smoked on this one. And I talked to Dwayne Brad at Mount Royal University a couple days back, and he said, Conservative parties should always out fundraise progressive parties. And he said, this is a pretty significant development for provincial politics.
So why do you think that is? Is just because a lot of the governing parties are taking a big hit right now during the pandemic?
Yeah, I think there's a handful of factors. The first, of course, is the pandemic damage that's been done to the Kenney government. I think even internally they would say that's the case. The other thing that has happened is the UCP used their first 2 years, as most governments do, to try and push through, a lot of their agenda, a lot of their unpopular policies, and then in hopes that in the 2 years or whatever before the election, they can make some of that ground back. Of course, halfway through, they got hit with I guess we're halfway through now, but coming into halfway through, they then got hit by the pandemic. So they've really suffered, sort of a double whammy of blows against them. The NDP has also, I would say, been very successful. They have seized on a lot of the issues that are resonating among voters, whether that's childcare, whether that's sick leave, whether that's vaccinations. They've really had an opportunity to hammer away at the governing party. So I think that's probably one of the factors that goes into fundraising, and of course is reflected in the polling numbers that show the UCP slumping a little bit.
Now, it's not clear yet what's going to happen with the federal Liberals' childcare announcement. They promised $10 per day daycare. Now, the province, however, has already said they will opt out of federal cost-sharing agreements. Tyler Kenney said it's likely to be more of a 9-to-5 program in the cities run by unions, which really won't work for all Albertans.
Yeah, that's sort of the line they're working on now. It's one of those issues that they're probably, if I had to cast into the future, they're probably going to have to play ball a little bit on, just because I suspect it's one of those policies that is so popular among so many families in the province. But of course, so the Liberals announced this in their budget, and now they need to go ahead and come up with agreements with each province, because it's not a national program per se. They're providing money for it, and they're going to set standards and conditions, presumably, and things like that. So the UCP saying, look, we maybe just give us the money and we'll come up with our own plan. That's maybe not going to fly, but certainly there's going to be some sort of negotiation between the province and the feds on how this is all going to work out. And I personally have a hard time imagining the government turning up their nose and walking away from something like this. But you never know, I suppose.
Yeah, stranger things have happened, especially in politics. Yeah. Tyler, Blaine Calkins, the Red Deer Lacombe MP, has introduced a federal bill that, if adopted, would add sentencing changes for those who have targeted rural properties. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so this is yet another issue that's a bit of a blast from the past, something we talked about a lot a couple years ago. Now, what this does basically is it changes the way you could be sentenced for a crime. So you rob a house in a city, you rob a house in a rural area, those are both the same crime. However, it's almost an aggravating factor. So if you choose to target a person for a robbery or a property for a theft, in a place because of its remoteness or distance from emergency services or something like that, that could then be used at sentencing to help the judge weigh on what the sentence might be. So, you know, the bill's introduced, debates will come, may or may not become law, although that sort of thing. But just goes to show it is still an issue, and of course an issue that is especially important to people in Alberta and Saskatchewan and Manitoba.
Absolutely. We have a lot of rural families here in southwestern Alberta. Legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, thanks for your time today.
My pleasure, Hal.
Well, spring is here and many people are itching to get their gardens going along with planting flowers, trees, and shrubs. But apparently there is a right way and a wrong way to do these things. So we thought that we should enlist an expert today. Karen Barbie is the co-owner of Green Haven Garden Center in Lethbridge. Welcome to Bridge City News. Karen, so great to have you on today.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So this year we had snow in April again, and then of course it can happen in May as well, because you know we are in southern Alberta, anything can happen, right? But with that in mind, when is it actually safe to start planting our gardens with the iffy weather that we have?
Well, there's some things you can plant early. So things that like potatoes and onions that go in the ground, they're underneath the soil, they're fine to plant. Radish seeds, lettuce seeds, spinach seeds, all wonderful time this time of year. Easy to do. So our gardening kind of means that you can't do it all in one weekend. It is over a period of time. If you want to have a lot going on, a lot of people are doing strawberry plants now. Asparagus plants can go in. So there's a fair amount of early garden stuff.
Right. Now, does that mean that those specific vegetables are resistant to cold and would be able to, you can actually plant it early in the season because they're a little bit more hardy?
Yeah, they're earlier and they like the cooler weather, so they don't mind it. I mean, we're over hopefully the heavy cold like last week, but now the soil is warm enough for those seeds. Even cauliflower, broccoli, cabbage, people are starting to look at either seeding those out or soon they'll plant their little plants of those out.
Awesome, good to know. So now what do we need to do to prepare the soil for a good growing season?
Oh, that's the most important part. Really, it is. So it means when you have your vegetable garden, you want to have really good loose soil, and it needs to have. In southern Alberta, we have heavy clay soil, so loosening it up and amending it with any kind of good compost. So it can be composted steer manure, composted sheep manure, compost that you've done yourself, and you really work it into the soil. You want a good 6 or 8 inches worth, I'm still inches, of having that looser soil so that you can get your seeds and they'll start growing in that soil.
Okay. Now, any advice on how to control those bugs that like to destroy weeds and plants? How can we control those bugs naturally without damaging chemicals?
Well, there's lots of actually good organic chemicals, and I always say, like, you can't really do a preventative because some plants naturally don't have a problem and others are susceptible. So there's a safer soap product. Woodstream makes a beautiful safer soap, and one called Trounce and another one called Bug Be Gone. Those are all wonderful contact sprays. Soapy water that you use yourself with dish soap, sometimes you can burn your leaves or suffocate them. And you just wait to see if you have a problem. One thing that we always find, like with radishes, they're susceptible to a maggot, a root maggot. And so when you plant those, your onions and your radish, you can actually sprinkle a little Epsom salts in the row, but with your seed, and then cover up your soil, and that does help keep those under control.
Okay, interesting. Good advice there. Now, Karen, is it true that if you seed several times through the spring, like say every 10 days, that you can prolong your harvest of baby vegetables and those tender greens? Is that true?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that is true. So things like lettuce, all the different kinds of lettuce and radishes respond the best for doing that successive seeding, it's called. A few in herbs, not everyone does it with dill and cilantro, but it can be done. And it's really important to do it for the lettuce though. because you just get this really good crop. You can do it about till the end of June, when if we start getting really warm in July, they don't germinate so well. So you always have to do it starting May and a little bit end of April, May, and into June.
Okay, well, good to know. Now, what about perennial plants? Do we need to do anything with them to prepare for a good growing season?
Yeah, that's not so much the soil. You can kind of work around them, cut off all of your dead leaves and dead stems and get everything cleaned up to the green again. And then you can always work in a little bit of compost around them. They're usually not heavy feeders as far as trying to fertilize, but compost is a wonderful thing. Bone meal is good, and you just sort of can work it into that soil. And they can get planted early now too. Perennials can take cooler nights, so you don't have to wait for May long weekend to plant perennials.
Well, it's good that they can take those colder nights, because we do seem to have a lot of those, even when we have the warmer days, unfortunately. It seems that way.
Yeah, yeah, that's so true.
Yeah. Now, we all love green lawns, don't we? So when should we rake off last year's dead grass and be applying that fertilizer? And how often should the grass get watered?
Well, now we've had the moisture, so the grasses are green. The grass is greening up quite well here. That raking and cleaning up actually needed to happen in April this year because we were very dry this winter. There was a lot of leaf cleanup and everything that needs to get done right away. So it's basically for us too late for power raking, but you can do a hand raking. And then fertilizer should start now, and you can do it every couple of months. There's some good spring, summer fertilizers that will help keep that lawn nice and green.
Okay, so take note, everyone. Time to rake those lawns now, because it's
Yes.
April.
Yeah, get all the old leaves off of it, and it's not growing really fast, but I think as we warm up, we're definitely going to see things greening up.
So put that on the to-do list for sure. How short should the lawn be mowed? Is there an ideal height?
I find that like 2 inches, so like 5 centimeters is a good depth. The lawn doesn't dry out really fast. It holds its own, but it doesn't get scorched and scalped. So that 5 centimeters is a good height to have. If you go lower than that, you run the risk of actually sunburning and drying out your roots on that lawn.
Wow, okay. I had no idea that could happen, but good to know. Now, Karen, do you have any tips on how to get rid of quack grass?
Oh, that's
And maybe explain
one of
what
our
quack
biggest...
grass is too as well.
Yes, because quack grass is a perennial grass that grows here on the prairies very well. It's very invasive, so it grows in lawns, but it can grow around the edges. It likes not such great soil. So if it's on the edge of sidewalk or something, it's very long bladed and it makes big clump, and it's not a pretty grass. But the more you try and pull quack grass, the more you're making it expand, because you're pulling on those little roots, and that actually makes it increase rather than decrease. And there is no organic chemical control of quackgrass. That is the one that actually official Roundup, the chemical Roundup, will kill it. It'll kill the root, but you also have to be very careful with your grass that's growing around. And that's one way. If you try and dig it out, you'll just go forever trying to get all those roots, but you can do it if you're persistent. There is a new Roundup called Advanced Roundup, and it's a vinegar based, so it might just keep burning the green off, but not actually killing the roots.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's a challenge. I have to say, quackgrass in Ontario, down east, they have one called crabgrass. And that's an annual grass that's a big problem there. And they can control that with crabgrass killers. We don't have crabgrass here. So our quackgrass is perennial, and it's very annoying.
Ugh, yuck. Okay, so what about those pesky dandelions? Speaking of pesky things, right? What actually works to keep those under control?
Well, if you have some spare time and like to be outside, you actually can dig the roots out, and that does help. There's actually little dandelion diggers that work quite well.
Okay.
So that's one way. There's another product called Weed Be Gone that's iron-based, so it's not a chemical, and you keep spraying it, and it actually makes the dandelion go sort of black and can control it. Yeah, so it's fairly effective. And then back to the chemical, there's the one called Killex, which is not available in garden centers all across Canada. Killex is still allowed to be sold in Alberta, and it is the one that has the chemical called 2,4-D, which makes the dandelion grow to death, is what happens. It makes it grow real fast, and it kills it.
Okay, kind of just speeds up the process.
Yeah, speeds it up, yes.
Interesting.
So there are some choices for that one. It's definitely another one that people have to decide how much and what they want to do with the dandelions.
Yeah, very informative. Thank you. Now, do you have any specific advice on how to grow large, healthy tomatoes?
Oh, yes. We love growing tomatoes. I think that's the most important plant for every single person. If you only grow one thing in your garden, the tomato is so productive for us anyways.
Yeah.
And good soil. We love using that compost kind of stuff that works. There's some really good fertilizers, some organic that are excellent. And one product that they always seem to like is some extra calcium. So a fertilizer with extra calcium in it. There's liquid form and dry form. And just depending, you shouldn't use a dry form of tomato fertilizer in a tomato that's in a pot. In the ground, it's okay. But if you're growing tomatoes in pots, use a fertilizer you can mix with water.
Okay, interesting. Now, speaking of summery stuff, what's the secret to growing a large strawberry patch? We all love strawberries in the summer.
Okay, well then back to good soil again. And actually the strawberry plants are important. They do tend to burn, like grow themselves out after a few years. You might have to replace your strawberries like every 5 years. The June bearing strawberries give you the biggest crop in the month of June, and they're actually the hardiest. These new ones called day neutrals will start in August and go till it freezes. Good soil again, and I find they're so-so for trying to grow in pots. You actually do better if they're in the ground.
Okay, and Karen, are there do's and don'ts of growing roses?
The roses are two different kinds. There's tender roses that have lots of do's and don'ts, because here on the prairies we have to protect that root for the winter, or you can get winter kill, and they're grafted. So the graft comes alive, but you don't have a rose plant anymore. The hardy shrub roses, there's lots of varieties of those. And really you just trim off if there's a little bit of dead stem on those. And lots of sun. So they need a minimum of, well, a good 6 hours of sun would be the minimum. They're better off with about 8.
All right. Now, is there a good time to plant evergreen or spruce trees? What's the best time to do that? Or is there?
Oh, they can get planted all summer, but the nice thing about planting those evergreens is that they have time for their root to develop. So as soon as the frost is out of ground and they're available at the garden centers, is a great time to get them growing. You've got cooler, not so hot and dry first thing in the spring, so they can get a root system established, and then they're okay. We do sell plants all year long. In the summertime, it's sometimes not as available. There's not as much choice available for those.
Okay. Now, if you were digging holes for those sort of coniferous trees, how big of a hole how big should you be digging, and what would you do for fertilizer and soil for that type of tree?
Oh, yeah, those ones, usually what you do is dig twice the width if it's in a pot. Most of them come in some kind of a container. So twice the size of that pot all the way around, and the depth about 1.5 times. And then you take out, with us, the clay soil that's heavy and not so great. And then you kind of work in and amend some better soil with it. Some triple mix soil is good, or some compost. Peat moss is good too. And then plant that plant back in. We sell a product called Mike, which gives our customers a 5-year warranty. So they have to apply that Mike right to the root ball and then plant it in. So you don't fertilize at that time. If you do fertilize without using Mike, something that's a root starting fertilizer. And that means it's quite high in that second number in the fertilizer. Usually that's sold in a liquid form.
Okay, great advice. Now then, on the flip side, what if you were wanting to plant more leafy trees or shrubs? When's the best time to plant, and what type of soil and fertilizers do those need?
That would be about the same as the evergreens. The more important thing with those ones is they go through a little bit more transplant shock with the leaves on them. So when you plant them, you try and do it when it's not in the heat of the day or really windy. Try and do it early morning or late afternoon, early evening. Yeah, so that helps them. And that soil again is critical to get the roots going and amending it a little bit. So compost seems to be the answer for just about everything.
It's the way to go. Well, what great advice you've given to all of us, Karen. Thank you so much for your advice and for your time, your expertise, and for being with us today. Karen Barbie is the co-owner of Greenhaven Garden Center here in Lethbridge. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.